Hello, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of the MCTAC team, I would like to thank you for tuning in for today's session. Today, we're going to be going over Module 8 of our Data Beyond the Tip of the Iceberg series, and the title of today's module is The Data Matrix Staff Data. Today's presenter is going to be Chris Copeland, who is a MCTAC consultant, and I will pass it off to Chris.
Thank you very much, Ashley. And welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us. So the agenda today is I want to talk somewhat about the some ideas around staff-specific data before going into some of the detailed look at the across the matrix around finance, HR, quality compliance, etc. And then we can talk a little bit about the next modules. So when we're thinking about data around staff, individual staff, I think we shouldn't forget that all staff need targets for the performance. It's important that we just don't focus on those that have financial targets, but that we're looking at everybody within an organization to achieve this balanced approach to data. And really, it doesn't matter where you fit into an organization, targets and goals should really and are a feature of work life. And it really sometimes only matters in terms of the detail. The CEO of an agency reports to the board around sort of aggregate data about how the agency is doing, and housekeeping should have data on the cleanliness of the bathrooms. And it's critical to understand that both those are key to the success of an agency. And as I put there, it's for some, it's the cleanliness of the bathrooms is more indicative of a well-run organization than anything else. So both really deserve to have data available. When we look at data regarding staff specific, we also need to be very cognizant, I think, of the impact that data can have on staff. It can be very intimidating and alienating, because the data that we're looking at is often, and the last module I think showed a lot of data that was about what people do and less about how they do it. So I think as we talk about data across this matrix, it's important to think about how making sure the staff is the data is meaningful to staff, and really how it again connects through to the mission. So thinking about that, I was looking at an article published by Atul Gawande in the New Yorker back in 2012, entitled Big Med. And he was looking at the experience and lessons learned from the restaurant industry, something I've looked at and thought about a number of times. And there's a link there on the page to it. And he was fascinated by how the Cheesecake Factory managed to produce high quality meals at high volume across multiple organizations and always get it right. And he was fascinated enough to go and ask and find out how they manage that. And what he found was, and this is where it's important, I think, for our industry and staff, is that the chefs, the line cooks, had really detailed instructions on the ingredients, and they also had very detailed instructions and photographs of what the outcome should be. They had really high attention from experienced supervisors looking at the food that's produced and looking at it from an outcome point of view. But importantly, and this is the sort of the lesson I want to draw through the rest of these slides, is that nobody told the chef how to do the meal, how much salt, when to base the meal, when to sequence the cooking. So the lesson there, I think, is that we should be honoring the skills of the clinician inside the data, and trying to create a framework for success from the data, but really honoring those skills. We all know that interactions and the relationships that people develop with the people we serve is often the most important, and we can't measure that necessarily, but we can measure the outcomes, and we can measure and give lots of indications about what should be done rather than how it should be done. So I think it's worth reading that article. It's a fairly long article and has lots of other, I think, revelations in that. So I think really important to bear in mind as we go through the rest of these modules, rest of these slides. So again, just looking at the matrix, we're talking about the staff specific data across finance, human resources, quality compliance, the population, the outcomes. So let's look at those a little bit more detail, but from the point of view of how to make the data that we're using as relevant and important to the staff as possible. So finance, we're obviously going to have a lot of information, data around very hard information, data around productivity. But I think it's also important to think about data that can be linked quality of services to finance. So there's more in it for the staff rather than just counting the number of services they did and holding people accountable, incredibly importantly, for volume of service, etc. But other things like no-show rates, length of time in service, frequency of service and engagement rates can all talk to the quality of the individual service and links very clearly to finance. So here's some of the data that we can talk about in finance that isn't just about number crunching, it's also about the quality of the service being provided by the individual staff. Similarly, the performance evaluations is a place where we can begin to involve staff in metrics and data that really would be a place not just to evaluate, but to develop staff as well. Obviously, the data can give you, the agency, lots of information about outliers, who's performing well, who isn't performing, or is performing as a superstar. But take into account that staff are overwhelmed by their job duties, and a performance evaluation that just becomes rote, meaningless checklists don't help in terms of supervisory development. So thinking about staff buy-in, so we need to make sure that supervisors understand it's a developmental and not a punitive tool, linking incentives to the evaluation, using data that's about helping staff develop. And the data that we use in performance evaluations can really acknowledge a job well done and improve the quality of the workforce, the team as well. Now, moving on to, the slides are a bit slow here. Pause while the slides move on. Quality and compliance. I think this is an area where we can involve staff in the development of some of the data that we use. I mean, obviously staff need to have feedback on their performance regarding audit and contractual obligations. And if we've done a risk assessment already, staff need to understand which risk group they're in. So it's important that if we're auditing staff frequently, they understand why, they understand that this is a high risk group, that high risk work they're doing. And if not audited regularly, that the agency or the staff or the program could be at risk. And the data shared with staff should be unique, but also in relationship to peers, so people can understand where they fit into their peer group. I think, as Tony in the last module pointed out, that it can be an incentive to understand why somebody's performance is not being as judged as well as somebody else's. But including staff in the development of data around quality can be very important in terms of understanding why the data is there and why people are being audited. And if we come up with these smart outcomes, specific, measurable, relevant, and time sensitive, and we look at things like, again, quality indicators like the golden thread of the treatment, reading the notes and making sure that the language is respectful, observational review to make sure the interactions are trustworthy, are respectful. Reviewing incident reviews and treatment patterns can tell us a lot about the quality of the work being done. The next slide, and apologies, the slides are slow to move on. So talking about population health, again, deciding, bringing staff in to decide on some of the metrics and data here can be quite successful, because a lot of the work that's been done is a lot of the data that we could collect is going to be very specific to the programs of the work being done. But choosing assessment tools is important for staff to be able to understand the work they're doing, and importantly how the clients themselves are are being successful with their treatment. And there's some examples here. Some of these are proprietary, some of these are free to use, but choosing the right assessment tool can be incredibly effective in understanding how the agency influences change on individuals, but as it rolls up through the agency in terms of the populations being served. And one doesn't really necessarily need to rely on normalized and researched examples of assessment tools. For some of us, we work in agencies that don't really lend themselves to these evidence-based practices and evidence-based assessment tools. So there are other ways that clinical indicators can be developed. Satisfaction feedback. You can work with a group of clients that people use in the service to get direct feedback about how the service is and how individual staff are working. And that can be a great place to gather ideas for what is a valued indicator for success from the point of view of the person served. And that would give us a great insight into what they feel is important in terms of the interactions with staff. And also follow up with people after the completed service gives us a very good idea about the outcomes and the success of individual programs, but particularly individual staff. So don't be put off by the lack of technology, the lack of evidence-based assessment tools. Using pen and paper, adding things up over time can give you very valuable information about staff performance and feedback to staff in terms of how their services and how their individual treatment is being successful. I'm waiting again for the slides to move on. I apologize for these delays. In terms of outcomes, again, the outcomes developed at an agency level really demonstrate the ability for the agency to meet its mission. But from a point of view of staff understanding their work, we don't necessarily, again, need to have data from the RHIOs or have PSYCKES data. If that isn't something that you're able to get at the moment, it's also possible for staff to be very heavily involved in developing outcomes for the agency. So, for example, self-reported outcome data on a regular basis that staff are gathering from the people they work with can give you valuable information about ER use, about hospitalizations, about A1C. Has your A1C level been checked? Have you been to a primary care practitioner recently? So based within the work that staff do with clients on a regular basis, asking questions about proxies for outcome can be very valuable in terms of longitudinal self-reported outcome. Done over a period of 6 months or a year, staff involvement in outcomes in this way can give the agency incredibly valuable information about the success of their programs and the ability to meet its mission. So it would be really important that the staff understand this as gathering these outcomes is an important part of the job. And also, interestingly, I think the people using the services can begin to see how their overall outcomes are included in the overall success of the agency, that they themselves have an important part to play in understanding the quality and the success of services that they're involved in, not just the staff doing this, but also the people receiving the services as well. So I think what I'd like to do now is hand it back to Ashley to talk about future modules. And thank you for listening again. And again, I hope this has been helpful in understanding some of the work that we need to do with staff, not only in developing hard assessment data to hold people accountable, but also to make that data meaningful so it feels as though it's part of a supportive and evaluative work with staff within an agency. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. And thank you everyone again for tuning in. So this module wraps up our series of modules around specifically the data matrix from our different kind of roles or perspectives. So our next set of modules are going to really be an opportunity to hear from people in the field and hear from people that are really doing this work. We're working with some agencies to share some information that they've been doing around, these kind of data champions or outcome champions who are going to share some really great tools and strategies and steps that they've taken at their organizations to share with you that we hope will be really helpful. So these will come TBD sometime in early 2021, sorry. So look out for these soon. And then our last slide, as always, is just our standard question and feedback opportunity. So if anyone has any questions or comments, as always, please feel free to reach out to us. Our email address is mctac.info@nyu.edu. Send us a note and we will get back to you shortly. Thank you so much again to everyone, and we will chat with you again soon. Bye.